Before we start, I just want to reiterate our thanks to the New York Review of Books for co-hosting and to say just how great it is to look out, if I'm not wearing my glasses, into this auditorium and see the faces of so many people who have helped us build and sustain the publication, but also the community that is ChinaFile over all these years. And so from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of my ChinaFile colleagues and my colleagues throughout the Asia Society, I just want to say thank you. Four of the kind of people that I just mentioned are sitting next to me on this stage. You should have their full bios in your handouts, so I'm not going to spend too much time introducing them, but I will just tell you that they are from my far left. Ian Johnson, who is the Stephen Schwartzman Fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, longtime foreign correspondent, also a longtime writer for the New York Review of Books. To his right is Jiang Xue, who is an incredible investigative reporter who spent most of her career reporting from the western Chinese city of Xi'an and is now living in Washington, D.C. Next to her is Li Yuan, a columnist for the New York Times, and when she's calling herself Yuan Li, she is also the host of an incredible podcast called Booming By, which I think many of you listen to. And then next to me is Annie Zhang Jieping, who is currently a Nieman Scholar at Harvard, and she is also former reporter, a former editor, and the founder of a new platform based in Taiwan called Matters Lab that we'll be hearing more about in a few minutes. So I thought that just, and I should note that actually we're going to be doing a little bit of translation. Jiang Xue is going to speak sometimes in English and sometimes in Chinese, and so that's part of the plan, and just be patient with us as we do that. A few of us, actually all of us, except for Ian, were at dinner last night, and I was reminded that when ChinaFile launched 10 years ago, we did so with a panel of New York Times correspondents who had covered China for US readers over a span of many decades, and I think actually went all the way back to Seymour Topping, who covered the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s. So this was in 2013. Xi Jinping was sort of just coming to power, and it was a moment when, relative to today, covering China was comparatively easy. Emphasis on relatively and comparatively in that sentence. But foreign correspondents and freelancers of all different stripes traveled around the country without too much interference. Chinese reporters, including Annie at one point, were able to send their stories to us and other foreign publications if they had trouble publishing them at their home publications, or if they just wanted foreigners to be able to see China through their eyes. Many of us went back and forth with relative ease between the two countries. At ChinaFile, we commissioned photo essays and short documentary films, many of them by Chinese journalists. We reported on everything from female imams in Chinese mosques to drag queens performing at rural funerals. That was Ian's story. To a group of rural children raising themselves on a mountaintop while their parents were away, thousands of miles away, working in factories. And I think it's fair to say that at that moment, even though arguably things were less open than they had been a decade earlier than that, nevertheless, very few of us, I think, foresaw how much of that relative ease and openness would be gone 10 years later. And so we embark on our second decade as a publication at a moment that feels really different, when so many of China's best journalists, and foreign ones too, can't return to China. And when a whole host of forces, some of which are political, some of which are technological, have made it much more difficult for readers, both readers inside China and readers outside China, to just know what's going on there. But I also think it's safe to say that the appetite and the audience for knowledge about China has continued to grow despite these setbacks. And so reporters are finding new and different ways to do their work, some of them from outside of China. And in particular, there is a growing new ecosystem of independent Chinese language media, much of which takes sort of novel forms institutionally and substantively, and that is advancing this project of getting accurate information in and out of China in ways that deserve attention. It's good to see that so many of you feel the same way. So that's what we're going to talk about. I thought we would just start by asking each of you to just tell us a little bit about how you came to be here. What kind of work did you do when you were reporting from China, and what do you do now? And maybe we'll start with you, Li.
With me?
Yeah.
Okay.
just give a quick
in the middle. Okay.
Introduction.
I started working for the Wall Street Journal here in 2004, and then in 2008, I moved back to China just ahead of the Olympic Games. I was the editor of the Chinese Wall Street Journal for many years. Then I moved to Hong Kong in 2015 and started a China tech column because remember the Alibaba IPO, all the fanfare around that time, 2014. And in 2018, I went to the New York Times, and my official title is still Asia Tech columnist. And but I was writing a lot about tech, for the Times. Then the pandemic hit, and I had to go back to Hong Kong and stay there and started writing about all kinds of things about China, less and less about tech, unfortunately. And in 2021, I moved to Seoul because of some visa problems in Hong Kong. And earlier this year, I moved from Seoul to New York, which I consider my second home. So that's where I am.
Jiang Xue. I become one report from 1998 until 2015. But at that time, now when we look back, people say that is a good period for Chinese journalism. Some people said it is a golden times for Chinese journalism. But after Xi era, we lost space for report. So I become one independent report from 2015. I want to do my best to avoid the censorship from government. So I do some. Try to report some so-called sensitive stories, such as human rights lawyers and such as. Last summer, I come to North America to visit my family members. So I'm still stay in North America, but I can't care about China. I still continue my work, including white paper protests last year, and do my best to do some reports. So now I still here, but I continue my work. Thank you.
I think maybe we'll come back in a few minutes to the essays that you wrote about the white paper protests, because I think they're a really important example of what we're trying to kind of explore here. But why don't I let Annie, you go next.
Hi, I used to be a journalist based in Hong Kong for 16 years, journalist and editor, and I co-founded independent media there. And in the past 3 years, I'm running several projects like a decentralized social media platform and a bookstore in Taipei. So, and now I'm doing a Nieman Fellowship in Boston, so that's why I'm here.
Ian?
Me? Oh, well,
Yeah.
I'm not an Exile Chinese journalist, in case you wondered. Yeah, yes, right. But I worked in China for a long time. I left in 2020, and I just wrote a book about people who are challenging the CCP narrative. And I noticed that there's a lot more interplay between people who are overseas and people who are so inside China and outside China. Maybe in a way that I haven't seen, and I appreciate any feedback from the audience later, but since the Tiananmen era. I can remember after Tiananmen, I was in Berlin at the time, and there were people who started at Tiananmen University to try to figure out what had happened and why that disaster had happened. And now it seems like there's a huge amount of interchange between inside and outside China. So that's what really fascinates me, and I guess that's maybe why I'm here tonight. So thanks.
This is so nice, but you don't have to keep clapping after every sentence. So we did maybe wrongly, but we did call this panel China reporting in exile. And I guess I was thinking a little bit about the reporting being somehow exiled from China, and the reporters themselves being in various forms of exile. And yeah, I just wonder about what you think about that word. I mean, in English, exile comes from a word that has to do with being banished. The Chinese equivalent is a little different, right? Liu Wang has this sense of sort of water and flowing, but also the word wang, which is like loss, fleeing, and even kind of death. And I just, not to overemphasize that too much, but I just wonder, you all said you don't think of yourselves as being in exile, and I wonder why. And I know Li, you had this great conversation a few months ago with another great writer, Murong Chuizun, about his sort of creeping, his sort of gradual acceptance of the idea that he was in exile, and he became kind of more comfortable with that term. But I guess I'm just interested, like, what is it, how are you thinking about where you fit in and like what it means to be doing this work of trying to understand China from outside of its borders?
Yeah, we were talking backstage, like very last minute, like neither three of us believes we are on exile. But I also, deep in my heart, I know we are in denial. I actually, I went to journalism school at Columbia. I wrote about the Tiananmen exiles and did a few profiles of them. At that time, I read about the Russian exiles from 1918, the Russian Revolution, and they were like sitting on a suitcase and always a packed suitcase and ready to go home, and that lasted for decades, and they were never able to go home. So I determined, for me, I don't want, because what you said about Liu Wang, that word just, it's a little bit sad, and we just, we can't go back to China. Many people can't go back to China. We're reporting, we're working outside China. But at the same time, I know deep in my heart, I want to make New York my home. And this is my home maybe for a very long time, but hopefully not for too long, but we never know. Right? Many Chinese know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's how I feel. It's a very conflicted feeling toward this word, Liu Wang. It's I have a great life here. I have so many friends. As I said, I went to the Hong Kong supermarket the first week I arrived here. I saw so many types of tofu skin, and the tears just came up because when I was living in Seoul, there are not many Chinese groceries to shop. And that's like what I felt like, I can make New York my home. I don't feel like Li Yuan is kind of like you have no roots, but I kind of feel like New York is such a great city. I can make here my home. That's how I feel. I don't know if I answer your question, but it's a very conflicted feeling.
What about, you're in Taiwan, which is a very different kind of thing, right? You were born in the mainland, went to college in Guangdong, lived in Hong Kong for all those years,
Yes.
and now you're not, can't be in Hong Kong anymore, just aren't in Hong Kong anymore. How does it?
I'm trying to thinking about what Li Yuan said just now. Where the tofu is, where is your home, right? Where your home is. And when reading the title of this event, I wrote some notes about in exile. Yeah, because for example, I truly I don't determine myself to be exiled. So I don't want to change myself. So I want to change China in some way. So when thank you. Yeah, because when we are using the word in exile, I think we may overly fix China's borders. I mean, we make a very clear distinction inside and outside, between inside and outside. But the reality is we don't have such a clear cut. Because when I went to University of Hong Kong and then I started my journalism career in Hong Kong for the next nearly 20 years. Hong Kong is like the gateway of all generations of people flee from China in different historical backgrounds. The wars, the civil wars, the political movements, or the famines, or all kinds of things. So I remember a writer used to say that the 20th century's China's history is like meat minder. It's a meat grinder. Yeah. It's like a meat grinder. Different generations of people flee from the country and to all over the world, and also that's why we can see the so-called global diaspora Chinese community all over the world, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia, US, and Europe, and I think whose identity may not necessarily align with Chinese, even so. So we are just in the process of this diaspora community now. But evidently, we are now in the process, and we are now part of it. So that's how I try to change China, make it like an evolving process, rather than we put ourselves in the so-called in exile position.
You can really hold your applause.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
My colleague Chen Jing, who's here, is fond of quoting the Chinese historian Jiang Xue's line that wherever he is, China, wherever I am, China is there. And I do feel like that's kind of related to what you were saying. Jiang Xue, you, and maybe you can, you have left China under slightly different circumstances more recently. I think it's not giving away too much to say that you feel some degree of danger if you were to go back. So my question is, do you think you are dangerous to the Chinese state?
Actually, I still thought and just do most normal things as a report and write, and just write some truths, what happened in China, and just record what I have seen, such as lockdown in Xi'an last year, 1 month, people can't got food, and 1 month we only stare in my room. I can't leave in my room. It's very crazy. So and just record, I have a saying what happened. But it's dangerous for maybe for government. I think because now, 就是说sorry， 就是在一切都保持沉默，机构媒体已经完全被打压下去的情况下，一个写作者可能表达出不同的声音，这对他们就已经是一种危险，这个是非常荒谬的 ，I think.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, Jiang Xue was saying that, since all the voices were silenced in China and all the institutional media organizations were basically eliminated by Xi Jinping, and there was
就是所有的声音都机构媒体被
all the
打压，没有
voices
声音。
disappeared. So, she just wrote what happened, right? 你就写了
不同
发生了什么。
的声音就会成为一个，只要你有
Yeah,
不
it's
同的
like
声
any
音，会
dissenting
成为一种危
voice
险
is dangerous in the eyes of the government. That's what it is. Basically, she just did what a journalist is supposed to do, and nothing else. It's very ridiculous. Yeah, it's not. It's right. It's yeah.
所以我不认为我是危险，但他们认为我是危险的。
I don't believe I'm a dangerous person, but to the state, they think otherwise.
One thing that I think applies to all of you, even to you in a certain way, Ian, is that you're interacting with your audiences and your readers in ways that are quite different from, maybe what we traditionally think of when we think of a reporter who goes out and does a story and then some random people that the reporter doesn't know reads it. Particularly you, Li, are very, very interactive. Your audience of your podcast, the audience members of your podcast sometimes become your subjects, sometimes become your sources. I think Jiang Xue, you do some reporting that way as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that's like and how you think about your sort of journalistic practice when you have this really close relationship with your readers and audience. You could answer first and then I'll let Jiang Xue.
I started this Chinese language podcast last year called 不明白, I don't get it. So I started in the middle of the Shanghai lockdown. It was very traumatic period, not only just for Shanghai people who are locked down for many weeks, but also for all Chinese. It's like, and I cried every day just reading the social media posts, looking at the photos, watching the videos, and I cried every day. And I've been writing for, New York Times and Wall Street Journal, writing for the English audience for many years. I just didn't have a vehicle to speak directly to the Chinese audience. And I was very angry at the time. I needed to do something, it's kind of like a therapy to myself. I just started this podcast with some young people, and I was surprised how many Chinese liked it, and it became really interesting. Like I think maybe like podcast is a lot more intimate media than print, so they kind of trust me. And when the white paper started, and I just tweeted on Twitter, I said, I would like to talk to people who participated in the protest in Shanghai last night. I got overwhelmed, with the replies. So many people wanted to talk to me, and they just trusted me. And I did a few episodes about the white paper protests, including one young lady who was detained by the police for more than 24 hours, and she described what she went through step by step. And I double-checked with her, triple-checked many times with her, are you sure you want to talk, even though we changed her voice? But it would be very easy for the police to figure out. Anyway, they just the process is really interesting to me because I didn't expect the podcast would become a vehicle for me to report outside China. You all know the censorship in China, and Chinese are very scared of talking to media, not only foreign media but also Chinese media. And it's super difficult. How are you going to find people to talk to among like 1.4 billion people? It's really, but this podcast has become really interesting. Really, I'm very lucky to, I didn't start this to have this vehicle, but it has become something for me to talk to the Chinese people, what they are experiencing in the economic downturn, like all kinds of things. It is, some of the podcasts became my New York Times column, and some of them didn't. But I actually try to practice, I always tell people I practice the same standards as New York Times, because otherwise it's very difficult for me to do both jobs. But because of that, I think people trust me more, and I try to be very front with them, what I'm going to do, do you want to remain anonymous? Do you want to, what information you want to share? It's like what I usually do for my regular job.
Do you have a sense of this, roughly of the size of your audience, or is that too hard to?
It's it's a little bit hard to tell, but yesterday we published a podcast about the death of Li Keqiang, why so many Chinese are mourning the former premier, even though he didn't really accomplish much, right? And I think just within 24 hours, we have more than 150,000 to 160,000 page views just on YouTube alone, not to mention Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's sometimes we get hundreds of thousands, sometimes just 100,000.
Do you have a sense of what proportion of those people are inside China, or is that really hard to?
Yesterday I had an event with the podcast audience, and 多少人是那个播客多少人？你昨天看多少人是在那个墙内的，多少在墙外的？
至少有40-50个人。
Okay, about a third of them said they started listening to us when they were in China, and then now they moved outside China. And many people also said they shared the podcast with their with people they trust, with their parents, and they specifically mentioned one or two podcasts they kind of came out of the political closet with their parents. It's really amazing. They listen to podcasts with them. Anyway, I'm going for too long, but it's really hard to report outside China. But I just feel like so many Chinese have so many stories they want to share, and I just feel very lucky to be able to share some of them.
Ian, I wonder. Oh, you're clapping. I wonder if you. I was going to ask you about the thing that you mentioned in your first comment, which is the sense that there is a lot of exchange of information and ideas and values between people living Chinese-speaking people living outside of China and inside of China, which just feels kind of new. And I wonder, what you make of that, why you think it's happening. How it might be shaping kind of social change or perception or politics in China, if you can go that far.
It was interesting. I was back in China in May, and there were people who have these WeChat discussion groups, and they do nothing but share audio recordings of, for example, of Yuan Li's podcast and other things like that. And the rule is you can't make any commentary. You can't say anything inside the group. You can just post that and listen to it. And so that you're not going to attract any attention by saying anything that censors can get a hold of. And they changed the name of the file a little bit, but everybody kind of knows what it is. So it clearly doesn't say booming by, podcast or something like that. But so I think the reach is quite significant of these things, but it's very hard to tell in a closed society like China. But I think, yeah, and also the use of VPN. We all know that VPN use as a percentage of the population isn't high, but in raw numbers, it's still high. I mean, even if it's only 1%, it's probably higher than that. But that's still millions and millions of people. And I think they act as gatekeepers, bringing stuff in and out. We saw the white paper protests where people were uploading videos to YouTube or sending it to Twitter, and then things were being downloaded again. So the impact, I think, is pretty big. And like Jiang Xue also wrote the piece at the beginning of the year about the youth of China, and that went viral and was all through China. People were reading it and recirculating it, and the usual cat and mouse game. But you could tell that these pieces do reach, even when written abroad, however you want to define it, exile or whatever.
Do you think that, this is for any of you, but I wonder how if you can tell how significant the pandemic and the lockdowns were in kind of stimulating people's appetite for new sources of information. Do you think that happened, or can you tell? Like, was that a turning point in terms of how aggressively people were trying to access information from alternative sources?
I think it's very important. There's information now published abroad. I think there's information will come back to China. Maybe will delay some days, such as 四通桥，但是彭载舟他说的那些话，然后其实在中国的那个社交媒体上是没法传播的，会分得非常快。但是他先到海外，然后传播了一轮以后就回到中国。之后的白纸抗议中，我们能看到很多的声音都是从那个时候传回去的啊，就是海外信息很重要。
Yeah, I translate. There was a protester, a lone wolf, what do you call? He just went on the bridge in central Beijing and wrote up banners, protest banners, calling for the end of the zero COVID policies, and also down with Xi Jinping, and really, really brave. In China, it was impossible to post those things, slogans on the Chinese social media. But last year we saw it started from the overseas Chinese students and the expats community. They posted a lot of protests, the same slogans here in New York and in other places in the world. And then it started the information, the images of these young people, mainly young people, young protesters went back. They were sent back, shared back inside China, and 这个是对那个白纸运动 right? It actually, the white paper movement was kind of encouraged by those things. It's all at one thing. There's the Great Firewall. It's the government spends so much money on that, right? But it's not completely, there are holes, and no matter how small it gets, and there are always people who try to get through those holes. And I just talked to migrant workers. They use VPN. Migrant workers from the villages, and people on Twitter were telling me, no, you can't find them. And actually they came to me. It's really, really amazing, right?
Yeah.
So Annie, you're kind of pioneering something that I don't really understand, which is a decentralized Web 3.0 platform for information and news. Can you explain how that relates, well, first of all, what it is, and then how it relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, maybe it's hard to explain for the exact project, but for me, for example, when we're talking about reporting China is not like a one action. Reporting China is like a whole process that maybe several key factors are in this kind of established process. For example, we need to have access to the information, we need to have the access to the interviewees, and we need to have the supportive network for journalists. So Yuan Li can do 不明白 because partly is because she still has the job in New York Times, right? So
But Jiang Xue used to get paid by her readers after she left
but
major
Jiang Xue
publications.
also has. I mean, when I'm talking about the supporting network, it's not made like the full-time editorial room, or it's also your editors, your friends, your colleagues, or your all kinds of readers, and also I think we also need to build a reader community. I mean, when we are talking about China reporting in exile or outside China, the readership community, the readership market or the readership community is very fragmented. So that's why so many people are moved by the Yuan Li's 不明白. When Jiang Xue and I were interviewed by Yuan Li, I think in the episode the third episode, right? That episode
is a year ago.
Also,
There have been like, what, 60 episodes? Have you done how many?
69.
yeah, and I get in touch with my middle school classmates when they listened to Yuan Li's epised, and they
Just
just
say like where your city is, like it's not like the top, not Beijing or Shanghai, right?
yes, they are in the Wuxi, my hometown, so a small city near Shanghai. So when after 2019, when the Hong Kong movement erupt, I just cut all the engagement with my older friends in China. But after I interviewed by Yuan Li, so many people write message to me. So I think every episode of Yuan Li's 不明白 podcast is like a public square. And for my project, what I want to do is trying to build this kind of a small-scale ecosystem for every independent journalist and every independent writers. We need to try to build the readers' community. We need to try to build trust first. Then, when we spread the facts or the truth, people will believe it. So that's in the conceptual level, I can explain like that. Yeah.
It must be, but there's so much misinformation flying around. How do you think about how to deal with that?
I always I remember the Nobel Prize winner, the Maria Ressa, right? Maria Ressa has a famous saying that she used to say, without facts there are no truth, and without truth there is no trust. But for me, I do think that the trust, maybe we need to rebuild trust first, and then we spread truth or facts to them. So how to rebuild trust, I do think the community needs to be small-scaled and warm, and we need to have shared similar interest, or we need to be neighbors, or we at least need to be the listeners to 不明白 podcast, or things like that. We need to hold many different small groups of people who can build trust first, especially in when we are facing the situation outside China. And then I think the misinformation, we always have misinformation and disinformation, but beyond the trust, I think it's much easier to communicate with each other.
That's really interesting. I think in a second I'm going to let all of you ask some questions, but before I do that, we had one question from a reader, and then I was reading the news and I thought I should really ask about this. So China had its National Women's Congress recently in Beijing, and at the Congress, a lot of the language that is usually used and has been used over a couple of decades to express the Chinese Communist Party's support for gender equality was stripped out of those statements. And this got me thinking about this question from a reader, which was that the reader noticed that it seemed like it seems like a lot of independent Chinese language journalists are women, that a lot of the leaders of the white paper protests were female, and it seemed like when you looked at this, the footage of the protesters last year, that there were more women on the streets than men, which was quite different from '89, where it was maybe a little bit more balanced. And so this reader wondered what might be the reason for that, and is sort of the increasingly patriarchal tone that the party is taking under Xi Jinping leading to a new kind of political consciousness among women. Any of you can answer that. Or Ian, you can if you want. No, just because you're a guy doesn't mean
I will say one thing. So when I wrote my book, I have two main characters. One is Jiang Xue, and another is Ai Xiaoming, who's a feminist scholar and documentary filmmaker. And I didn't set out to make women the two major characters in my book, but I began to wonder why there were so many women. And I think that part of it, this is just one hypothesis, but is that women are obviously part of Chinese society, but but held back, and so they're kind of outsiders, and so they don't benefit. They're not really part of the power structure. There's no women in the Standing Committee, the Politburo, no women in the Politburo. I don't think there are hardly any women even in the Central Committee of about 100 people. So they're kind of outsiders in the sense of, and so I think this gives them a more critical view towards society. And I think also perhaps in some ways they don't get caught up, some of the exile groups that we've talked about, or we think they get caught up, the exile groups tend to be male dominated and caught up in these internecine warfare, ego trip sort of things. And not that women can't get involved in that too. But I mean, it's,
we can do that.
But I think there seems to be more trying to get things done, a more pragmatic point of view. I don't know, but.
你说中文吧，也可以。
哦，对，哦，我是。
This is true equality now.
我是认为就是就是女性在一个父权社会的体制里边，她本身就是要弱势一些。那女性对弱势的这种感受是更深的。然后尤其就是中国过3年的这种清零政策里边，造成很多很多的悲剧。有人就是这些东西对就是说，可能我觉得女性的感同身受也会更强烈。然后后来所以在去年的抗议中，也很多的女性出现，当然也跟女权主义这些年在中国的发展也是有关系。
Women in a patriarchal society are held in a inferior position and also in a weaker position. And over the COVID lockdown, there was a lot of sadness, and that women were able to capture that better, and maybe they're not quite.
The white paper, that's also like women might be like more. Women can have a deeper sense of the lockdowns, all the tragedies, the traumas, and more traumatized maybe by that. And also the past few years, the women's rights movement, the Me Too movement in China, a lot of young women are involved in that. And that may be why, many protesters in the white paper movements are women, right?
在中国很多，而且我们看到就是对 ，sorry， 就是很多这个大学里边学新闻的，我们去新闻学院看到很多，真是女孩子会多很多。就是新闻它其实也是需要一点理想主义驱使，想改变和推动社会这样的一个职业，就是很多女性的
news journalism schools, right? And it requires more idealism, but. 所
以我说这些就是为什么，因为Susie 说到为什么有很多女性的这个抗议者，或者说女性的独立记者
我
想也是有关系，就是她这种有一点要推动和改变社会的这样理想主义的职业，大概女性可能因为她们的同理心或者等等，我不知道是不是会更强烈。他们对弱势群体、边缘的人群的他们遭遇的痛苦。
So their empathy, their ability for empathy toward weaker members of society is stronger, and maybe that's why they're at the forefront of these kinds of movements over the past few years.
So we could have a whole panel about that. I think now is your turn to ask some questions. We have about 20 minutes. So the way this works is you should raise your hand, and then please wait until a microphone comes to you, and then ask your question. And if you could ask your question, even if you speak Chinese, if you could ask your question in English, we'll try to do the translating up here. So, anybody? I have tons more questions if you don't. Okay. There's another microphone over here, so maybe that can be the next one.
Does this work? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today. And I didn't expect myself to be the first one to pick, so this might be very poorly phrased. Apologize for that in advance. But I think my question is, I think an obstacle I feel a lot in discussing with a lot of people, Chinese diasporas outside the US, about potential narratives, alternative narratives to the one that's promoted by the central government in China right now is that there's a very, because what CCP is trying to build is a single narrative. So everything that falls out of that single narrative becomes, in a way, censored. And that means there are a lot of a wide spectrum of narratives that's being censored, in opposed to a very single central narrative that's being promoted. And so I think a lot of times I feel that there's an obstacle of building a community or a movement that is powerful outside of that central narrative, because people who disagree with the central narrative could, within themselves, have very, very divergent opinions. To put in very plain words, I think a lot of us felt in last year's protests, there were people with very extreme views, very revolutionary views, versus people with very modest, sort of reformist views. And I think a question I've been thinking a lot is how to balance the goal of building a powerful movement with a single strong alternative narrative to the central narrative of CCP, versus building a platform, an inclusive platform that allows the expression of a wide range of diverging narratives that's being censored. And that's a very long question. I apologize for that. I hope that makes sense. Question. I'm really curious, both from your personal experience, your personal views, and in this particular role as journalist, how do you view that balance, and how you going about that balance? Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think this is a question for you, right? How do you build a platform with such a fragmented group of people rejecting a
maybe put it
Chinese
in a
government?
very short way. I don't know if I understand quite well, but maybe put it in a very short way. We don't really need a platform that includes everything. We need various different groups and platforms, and we need to connect them together. So that's the way we build the so-called independent community, void of the political manipulation. So I think we do need to build small, we need to try to find a system that we can connect all diversified small groups together, but without putting them together in the same platform thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can maybe add one sentence. For me, I'm a journalist. I just want the world to hear what the Chinese people's voices. And for the Chinese audience, for me, is when they scale the Great Firewall, come into what we call outside the wall. And I don't want them to see a desert. I want to plant a tree, and I think many more people can be involved in this. Everybody plant a tree, and eventually we can provide all kinds of information, all kinds of facts and truths. And so people, when people want to get information, they have accurate, good quality information that can inform them, what they want, what really happened in China, what's really happening. That's what I think.
I have a little question about that, which is how do you How do you think about avoiding kind of confirmation bias in the picture that China that you're presenting, right? Because if you are relying somewhat on your audience and the kinds of people who would already be listening to your podcast to tell you stories, then you're not talking to the people who don't listen to your podcast. And how do you think about striking that?
Yeah,
balance?
that's a problem. But I try to talk to people on the social media, and on the Chinese social media. Of course, my social media account was deleted, and I have a Weibo account with 0 followers. But still, when you want to try to reach out to people, and you got shouted at, and then when they post your post, like your private message, and this is like New York Times reporter trying to talk to me, like a Twitter and all those things. It's I know there's some confirmation bias, but what I try to do is I ask people what happened to them. For example, migrant workers, right? And people who ran away from China, why young people want to run away from China. And these are widespread issues, and the government acknowledged that. It's not I created some kind of issue for China. It's something the government has recognized, and I just try to get individual voices to talk to explain what's really happening. Because even for the pandemic, we still don't know how many people died, right? When the government suddenly lifted the lockdowns, ended the zero COVID policy last year, and many people died. We still don't know how many people died and what it was like, but I think eventually we can find people to talk to. And also, like migrant workers, Xi Jinping said in 2020, migrant workers are the first group of people who are affected by economic downturn. So I try to find migrant workers, and I find government data, if they're like reliable data I can use. It's very difficult to talk to all kinds of people in China. It's not like 20 years ago you can go to a village. Even in 2018, 2019, I could go to some really obscure places in China to talk to people. Now it's even for foreign correspondents inside China, it's very difficult to talk to people just on the street in China. It's very sad. It's like the Chinese government is making China a black box. When you become a black box, what can the people outside China assume of you? It's now they're not doing their own benefit. Yeah, that's what I say.
Okay, we can take, so whoever has the microphone. Yes.
Thank you for your brave sharing. I'm also a journalist from China, so I'm curious about how you get, because as you know that China society changed dramatically, so a lot of your old resources just keep silence. So how can you get a good sense of what really happened in China? Frankly speaking, I left China just last September. I reported the pandemic in Wuhan for 3 months in 2020, and I kept a close eye on the pandemic then. But since I left China to Oxford last September, I still can't understand what really happened in China, and I can never imagine that the pandemic ended in such a ridiculous way. So I would like to know that how you get a good sense of what really happened in China, both from the government level and from the society level, and how can you keep a balanced and honest attitude to observe China outside of China's society. Thank you.
Ian, you were just back doing some interviews. How do you think about this?
When I was back in China, I had, of course, having lived in China for 20 years, I had many contacts and many people I've known for years and years and years, so I could go back and visit. I think the real challenge is for new generations of correspondents who are going to, or trying to write about China, who haven't lived in China, or who are over an extended period of time, it becomes harder to make those, to keep those contacts alive. They're kind of like lights that kind of go out bit by bit. But what I've tried to do is in 2010, I started a series of Q&As with the New York Review of Books called Talking About China. It's still on their website, and I've interviewed over 30 public intellectuals in China, and I found...
And on ChinaFile. They're also on ChinaFile.
And it's also on ChinaFile, right, yes. And I was like what Yuan Li was saying, and I think there's so many people, it's very interesting to see how many people are coming out of China and circulating back and forth, that I find that I'm restarting that series now with people I've been talking to in New York. And these are public intellectuals who are traveling in and out. So I think I appreciate the question. I mean, you're right. But I think you have to just do the best you can. Being in China used to be sort of the answer to all the questions. You can be in China, you can know what's going on. But when I was back in China talking to colleagues at the paper, it's just really hard. It's kind of like it was. I was in China in 1984 as his student and interviewed foreign journalists, and they couldn't go anywhere, basically. And it's kind of going back to that era, I feel, even if you're in China.
Yeah, I want to add something. I think from two different positions, I mean, if you are reporting China from inside China or reporting China from outside China, there are both limitations. From inside China, people can say, 见树不见林. You can see the tree, but you cannot see the woods, the forest. Yeah. But from outside China, of course, you can see the whole big picture, but without many very detailed messages. So I think we just need to expose our limitations to the readers and let readers to know everything and the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Be honest.
Be honest.
Yes, that's what it is. 就是说他
It's hard for me to see who has a microphone. If you have a microphone, maybe stand up, and then I'll know to call on you. Oh, I have to pick them. Oh, okay. How about right here in the front row? Oh, Vivian.
Hi, I'm Vivian, friend. Okay, actually, two questions. I know in the very beginning, all of you denied the term exile. I understand that. But my question is, just to put it another way, if you think you live outside China, what advantage, what is disadvantage? Or like, if you're reporting outside China, what actually inspire you or free you from the old limitation? Or what has changed? What you've gained, doing the reporting outside China? But of course, the second question is, in your mind, what's the target audience? And, the challenge to that target market, in addition to the circumvention challenges, the political sensitivity, whatever. So what are the big challenges that you think you have to reach the target audience, that stop you from reaching the audience? Yeah, two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. 因为我做一些独立媒体的编辑工作，就是不光我自己写，有一些我会其实我们一直还是会关心中国发生的很多事情，也试图去找到作者，还在现场，然后去。
So I can't remember. I'm a terrible interpreter. Jiang Xue said I work as an editor for independent media, and sometimes I also write. 你也写，然后呢？ And she also look for writers who can write for the independent media outlets.
对我自己来说，我一直觉得是暂时住在这里。
For her, it's like living here is temporary. Has always been like that.
我也会，因为我现在离开中国时间不长，我觉得我对那个中国的感受还是非常强烈的。但是如果随着时间流逝，我也许会对这个我是保持一个警惕的。但是所以我尽量的要去保持这样的一个联络。
Yeah, I just left China not too long ago, so I feel like I still have I still can feel the pulse or whatever. It's but as I'm also conscious about that, as time goes by, I may lose the touch. That's yeah.
我在想，我们的读者还是那种就是对好的信息、有品质的信息保持一个有渴望的读者。
For our readers are people who want good quality information.
因为在中国，也许我们会就是我们在现场这种感觉是更好，但每一个写作者都喜欢那种在场的感觉。可是我在想，我现在如果回去，我的大部分的精力会集中在如何应对警察上面，其实也是一个很大的损失。然后我现在就是我会缺少，sorry.
So I forgot what you said.
She said, she said she's always, of course she wants to be, in China on the scene, able to observe things in real time. But if she were there, she would be using all of her experience to just deal with the police. And so she actually wouldn't be able to do that much journalism.
所以有得有失，就
So there are benefits and drawbacks. Did you want to say something?
Okay. I think maybe we don't need to put ourselves on the angle of God to judge ourselves. Yeah, we need to do our best as our position. And when we are talking about the whole small-scale ecosystem of the journalism thing, when we're talking about ecosystem, we do need people to put themselves in different positions, and different positions can complement each other. So yeah, it's for, in every position we just need to do our best.
Yeah, I could give one small example what I miss about reporting in China. I wrote a story, a column about all the domestic consumer brands in China that were emerging in 2020, 2021. And there was like one ice cream brand called Zhong Xue Gao. And I really like, it was super popular among the young people. But I was still living in Hong Kong at the time, but there was no way I could get hold of that ice cream and taste it myself and tell whether it's good or not, why it's so popular among the young people. So this is like, I can smell it. I can watch videos, I can listen to people, I can talk to people, but I can't touch it, I can't smell it. It's very frustrating, but this is what we have to deal with.
I think we just have, that was almost a perfect way to end, but I think we have time for just one more question. And I really can't see,
maybe all the way back. Oh. There's a lady who raised her hand for a long time.
Maybe just stand up.
Yeah, she's getting it. Thank you.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I probably want to ask this in Chinese because I'm asking for one of my previous reporter friend, and he's actually leaving China right now, and he has two questions for the journalist here.
Okay, so, can you do it in small chunks so that we can translate it also for the rest of the audience?
Yeah.
Okay. Who's going to take this? You going to take this? Ian, you want to take this? Yeah. Okay.
所以第一个问题是国内有一个考研名师张雪峰，他说闭着眼睛选一个专业都比选新闻专业好，这个事情您怎么看？
Yeah, there's after school, it's kind of like academic advisor, like advising people who want to enter graduate schools. And he said quite a provocative thing early this year. He said, like, if you just shut your eyes and pick any subject, it would be much better than journalism. Yeah, it's like the worst thing you could go like a graduate school. Yeah.
And there are Chinese students coming to U.S. journalism schools and giving it a try. So somebody must not be taking it.
Also, there's a second question. 国内有一个著名调查记者李威敖之前接受采访时候说，虽然国内的舆论空间有限，但做记者仍然大有可为。您是否认同他的看法呢？
Well, let's translate it first.
It's like the space for reporting is very limited in China, but there's still space to do things. So would you agree with that or not? Yeah. 你想回答第二个问题还是第一个问题？
就同一个
问题你回答吗？
因为我做了很多年记者嘛，我到现在还是很感激我作为一个记者的这样的一个生命历程。我觉得我是非常非常幸运的。
You're a journalist for a long time, and I'm still grateful for the experiences I've got during those like a long journey.
就是做记者这个职业可能不能带来财富，不能带来很多的成功，但是它带给你的那种快乐，就是生命的那种，就是说很丰富吧。你可以去采访到很多人，什么，还是非常有趣的。我说它是一个有趣的职业。
Okay, yeah.
有趣的人生。
Journalism doesn't bring money. It doesn't really pay, and it doesn't. It is true, you know. It's well known. Yeah. 没有钱也没有什么。
成功。
It doesn't come with fame, but it's give me so much happiness because of. It's so interesting. It brings all kinds of joys of life to me.
就是尤其在中国这样的国家，因为不是一个正常国家。就是
China, especially in China, which is not a normal country.
我们尽量做事情，希望它成为一个正常国家。这中间是能得到一个成就感的。
Yeah, we are trying to do our best to make it a normal country, and you can have a very strong sense of achievement while doing this.
当然，我幸运，正好就处在一个新闻业能够成长，然后这样一个时间。但是现在
I was fortunate that I grew up during a period when the so-called golden era of journalism in China, where I could do a lot.
确实，现在对国内很多学新闻的年轻人来说，是一个很不幸的一个阶段。
For Chinese journalism students at this moment, it's quite unfortunate time.
It's very difficult, 因为他们就没有发现，没有媒体了，没有媒体让他们
media outlet they can work for.
但是这不意味着说记者是没有价值和没有意义的。
Yeah, it doesn't mean that journalism doesn't have value or it's not it doesn't have the means. Like the meaning is not meaning. Yeah. 还有这个有用没用？你上次说的。
我当然始终
I'm
认
asking
为
questions
是。
because we had a lot of discussions about this.
是因为新闻业遭受到这样的打压，就是因为它是有用的。才会被认为是有重要的公民社会的力量，然后才会遭受打压。
Yeah, well, the government cracked down on journalism because it's useful, because it's a very important part of civil society.
I would say you could now thank our incredible speakers, but you already did. So thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we'll be back again sometime to have this conversation in a different era.